Before borders and countries, life in Equatorial Guinea was about the land, the forest, and the sea. People lived in tight-knit communities, measuring wealth in full bellies and strong families, not in money. The Fang people thrived in the forests of Rio Muni, hunting, farming yams and cassava, and living by the seasons. Their wealth was the soil, their knowledge, and their traditions. On Bioko Island, the Bubi people fished and farmed in volcanic soil, trading smoked fish for clay pots with nearby villages. It was a barter economy, direct, local, and self-reliant. There were no billionaires, but also no extreme poverty. Everyone had a role and a purpose. Life was hard. Disease, conflict, and nature's challenges were real, but the system was balanced and sustainable. People respected the land's limits. The forest was home, pharmacy, and grocery store. There was no national economy, just a mosaic of peoples and ways of life. This was the foundation, Chapter 0, before colonialism, cocoa, or oil. No formal currency, no stock exchange, just people living off the land and sea. Everything that followed colonialism, cash crops, oil, was built on this reality. Equatorial Guinea wasn't an empty space waiting for development. It was a functioning world about to be upended. The people living this life had no idea what was coming. This is where the economic story of Equatorial Guinea truly begins. Remember this baseline, because the next chapters will turn it upside down. The land and sea were about to face forces they'd never seen before. Then came the Spanish, and everything changed. The Spanish saw Bioko as a cocoa gold mine, not a home for the Bubi. Subsistence farming gave way to cocoa plantations, farming for export, not for food. Wealth flowed to Spanish plantation owners and a local elite, not to the Bubi laborers. By the 1950s, Equatorial Guinea had one of Africa's highest per capita incomes, but it was a statistical illusion. The mainland, Rio Muni, was left behind, fueling a deep divide between island and mainland that still lingers. Colonialism didn't just extract resources, it created inequality and a two-tiered society. The lesson: wealth comes from a single export, concentrated in the hands of a few, with labor exploited and undervalued. The Cocoa Kingdom's fragile prosperity was built on dependence and division. When independence came, the country inherited a broken system designed for outsiders, not its own people. The seeds of future crises were sown deep in the cocoa fields. The colonial era set a dangerous precedent that would haunt the nation. The story of inequality and dependence had only just begun. The 1960s brought independence and hope briefly. The dream used cocoa wealth to build schools, hospitals, and roads for all. But political chaos erupted as the new government, led by Francisco Macias Nguema, consolidated power. Ethnic tensions, stoked by colonial rule, boiled over between mainland Fang and island Bubi. Political instability quickly undermined the economy. Skilled Spanish plantation owners fled, taking expertise with them. Cocoa production faltered, exports declined. The promise of shared prosperity faded before it began. The first decade of freedom became a stumble. Optimism lost to infighting and mismanagement. The country slid backward, its dream of prosperity colliding with harsh reality. The stage was set for even darker times ahead. The 1970s were a disaster under Macias Nguema's brutal dictatorship. The economy was dismantled, intellectuals and professionals fled or were killed, A third of the population died or escaped. The cocoa industry collapsed. Production fell from 40,000 to under 5,000 tons. Plantations were abandoned, and forced laborers had no incentive to work. Private education, newspapers, and hospitals were shut down. The country was isolated. GDP shrank year after year. People reverted to subsistence farming and bartering. Per capita income plummeted to among the world's lowest. Foreign aid barely trickled in past the regime's paranoia. The decade destroyed human capital and trust in institutions. When Macias was overthrown in 1979, the new leader inherited a nation in ruins. The task wasn't to build, but to rebuild from catastrophe. The 1980s began with relief and slow recovery under President Obiang. The goal: stabilize, reopen to the world, and secure aid. Progress was slow. Cocoa production barely recovered. Coffee production barely recovered. The economy limped along, heavily dependent on foreign aid. Life remained a daily struggle for most. But beneath the surface, oil companies began exploring offshore. Small discoveries hinted at hidden wealth, but nothing major yet. The 1980s were a quiet transition, the calm before the oil storm. The seeds of radical transformation were being planted unseen. In 1995, the Zafiro oil field was discovered. Everything changed overnight. Oil production soared. GDP skyrocketed from 150 million to over 1 billion by 2000. Per capita income exploded, making Equatorial Guinea the richest country in Africa on paper. But the wealth flowed to the government and a small elite, not to ordinary people. Agriculture was abandoned, the resource curse took hold. The economy became almost entirely dependent on oil. Corruption soared and inequality deepened. The non-oil sectors withered away. For most, the oil boom brought rising prices, pollution, and disappointment. The gap between rich and poor widened dramatically. The 1990s brought incredible wealth to a few, but new problems for the many. The country's economic miracle was a mirage for most citizens. The resource curse was now in full effect. The 2000s saw oil money flood in. GDP peaked at over 20 billion. Mega projects transformed Malabo and Bata. A new capital, Oyala, rose from the jungle. The government showcased shiny infrastructure as proof of progress. But most people were left behind. Health and education budgets stayed low. Many lacked clean water, electricity, and healthcare despite sky-high per capita GDP. The wealth was hoarded at the top. Poverty persisted. Oil and gas made up over 90% of GDP. Other sectors suffocated. Equatorial Guinea became a classic petro-state, utterly dependent on oil. The 2000s were the peak of the oil illusion, rich on paper, poor in reality. The social reality lagged far behind the statistics. The oil party ended in the 2010s as prices crashed and production declined. GDP was slashed in half, government revenue dried up. Construction projects halted, leaving empty monuments to the boom years. Austerity hit. The illusion of wealth shattered. The crisis exposed the fragility of an oil-dependent economy. With no other sectors to fall back on, the country had no cushion. Underinvestment in people, education, healthcare became painfully clear. Public services were cut, jobs vanished, poverty deepened. The 2010s were a harsh lesson in the dangers of relying on a single resource. Oil wealth proved to be a temporary loan with brutal repayments. The need for real sustainable development was undeniable. Today, Equatorial Guinea stands at a crossroads. Oil is running out and the world is moving on. The government talks of diversification, tourism, agriculture, finance, but the challenges are immense. Decades of neglect have left non-oil sectors weak. Real change requires investment in people, education, skills, and health. Deep inequality and corruption remain major obstacles. The future depends on shifting from resource extraction to human development. Oil wealth must be invested in schools, hospitals, and real opportunities. The path to a better future is clear but difficult. Diversify and invest in people, or face deepening poverty as resources dwindle. The clock is ticking. The choice is stark: transform or be left behind. Equatorial Guinea's next chapter depends on what happens now.